Welcome in, everybody, ready for a deep dive. Today we're looking at the life and work of Bob Camblin, an American artist I think you'll find really fascinating. We've got a few sources to work with, a Wikipedia article to give us a basic timeline, an excerpt from a book that gets into some of his artistic ideas, and even the Amazon page for one of his
Oh,
books.
that's a fun mix. So we'll get the biographical overview, some deeper critical interpretation, and a glimpse of how his work is being presented to the public today.
Exactly. It's like we're detectives, piecing together the full picture. And like most journeys, I think we should start at the beginning with Camblin's early life. So, born in 1928, Ponca City, Oklahoma, came from a family of artists, actually. Both his parents, Don and Viva Camblin, were artists themselves.
No wonder he was drawn to the creative world. It's like
Hmm.
nature and nurture all rolled into one. I mean, even in high school, he was the art director for the yearbook.
Talk about a sign of things to come. And then it was off to the Kansas City Art Institute, got his BFA and then his MFA from there by 1955. But, maybe the real turning point, artistically speaking, was his Fulbright Fellowship. He got to study in Italy and
Italy, especially Venice. It had a
yeah.
huge impact. I mean, you can really see it, I think, in his later work. It's where he would have really encountered those avant-garde art movements, the ones really challenging those traditional approaches to art, embracing experimentation.
So maybe Italy planted the seeds for his kind of unconventional path later on. This is a guy who went on to teach at some really prestigious institutions. We're talking Ringling School of Art, the University of Illinois, University of Detroit, Utah, even Rice, right here in Houston. But then, get this, he just ups and quits teaching in 74.
I know, right? It's like he was at the peak of his career, at least in the academic world, and just walked away. Maybe it speaks to his complicated relationship with art itself, or even just, that struggle a lot of artists have, how to balance technical mastery with, well, with deeper meaning.
Mm.
He actually said once that art was like eating when you're hungry and sleeping when you're tired.
I love that. It's so simple, but it makes you think, right? Like he was craving this simpler, more intuitive way of existing, almost Zen Buddhist, if you want to go there. Is that how he saw art? As a kind of meditative practice?
Hmm. It's definitely an interesting way to think about it. I mean,
Yeah.
he clearly wanted to live free of those societal expectations, just totally immersed in his art. And that's what he did, went all in on the Houston art scene in the 70s.
Oh, the Houston art scene back then, talk about a time and place to be an artist. He was averaging, get this, like 5 exhibitions every year. That is prolific. And it was
Mhm.
during this time that he really started collaborating with Earl Staley, another artist.
Oh, their collaborations.
Yeah.
Now, those are fun to look at, especially when you think about them in the context of dadaism. Remember, that art movement, it was all about the process, not so much the final product.
Yeah.
And they had these big events. Like, I'm talking building giant junk sculptures on the beach just to destroy them.
Or like imaginary scaffolding for the renovation of the Statue of Liberty. It's like they were having fun, maybe even poking fun at the art world a little bit while still pushing the boundaries?
For sure. Playful and humorous, absolutely.
Mhm.
But there's this real exploration of artistic concepts underneath it all.
It seems like this tension between technical skill and deeper meaning, it was always there in Camblin's work. And that book excerpt we have, it really digs into this. He questioned the value of technique alone, said that art should be, and I'm quoting here, a vehicle for self-discovery and personal truth. He even called art a serious game full of puzzles that demand concentration.
He wasn't afraid to wrestle with these big questions. And it comes through in his art. Camblin was constantly striving for that balance, trying to master his craft, but also to convey these deeper, more meaningful messages through it. It's a tension so many artists grapple with. But for Camblin, I think it becomes even more important when you consider what he did next. The development of his really unique painting style. Mouches volantes. But I think we'll say that for part two. Mouches volantes. It's a really evocative name when you think about it, right? It means flying flies in French, and it kind of captures this feeling of Camblin's style, which really played with these ideas of optical illusions and perception.
Flying flies, I like that. So it's visual, but it's also kind of unsettling in a way.
Right, and he was inspired by some pretty big names like, M.C. Escher, those mind-bending staircases and impossible shapes, and even Marcel Duchamp. He used familiar objects and these abstract brushstrokes in a way that really messes with how you see the world.
You're making me think about those Escher staircases where, like, up and down become almost meaningless. Was that the kind of disorientation Camblin was going for? Make you question what's real?
I think it went deeper than that even. It wasn't just about, tricking the eye. It was about inviting the viewer to participate in the art, to become a part of it. He wanted you to not just see the work, but to question how you were seeing it in the first place.
So it's not just passively appreciating the technical skill, but like actually engaging with the ideas, with the concepts behind the work.
Exactly. Like, take one of his best-known pieces from this period, Big Al, Electric Age. It's a great example of Musha Volante's, blurring those lines between what we perceive and what's real. This interplay between, like, abstract shapes and then recognizable forms.
It makes me think about how all art is kind of about perception in a way, right? The artist sees the world and then tries to translate that vision, whether it's on canvas or in a sculpture or whatever.
Absolutely. And with Camblin, with Musha Volantes, that act of translation becomes even more complex, I think. He's not just depicting, a scene or an object. It's like he's giving you a puzzle, a visual riddle that you have to figure out.
No, it's not just looking, it's deciphering.
Yeah.
But Big Al, that wasn't his only notable work, right?
Yeah.
There's the marionette too, and that was from much earlier in his career. But it deals with some similar ideas, perception, reality.
Yeah, the marionette is interesting because it gets into some really existential stuff. Free will versus determinism, all of that. It makes you wonder, were these themes always there in his work, even before Musha Volantes?
And we can't forget about the influence of his upbringing, right? He was raised Catholic. How much of that plays into a piece like The Marionette? And then, speaking of religious themes, you've got Descent from the Cross, which is a pen and ink drawing, very powerful, very raw in its emotion.
The range, right. I mean, Camblin moved between styles, themes, just seamlessly, always exploring, always experimenting, always pushing himself. And that's part of what makes him such a fascinating figure, I think.
For sure. And this brings us to something really interesting about Camblin's later career, his whole fascination with anonymity.
Which wasn't just some random thing he did. It was a real artistic choice. Camblin believed that the artist's ego could actually get in the way of true creativity. So by removing his name from his art, he was letting the work speak for itself, completely free of any baggage about the artist or their intentions.
He was challenging the whole system, really. I mean, first he starts signing things as Anonymous Box Company or ABC, which stood for, get this, another Bob Camblin. And then eventually, even the signature disappears completely.
Such a radical move. Rejecting that whole cult of personality that so often surrounds artists, he wanted the focus to be purely on the experience of the art itself. Like, don't worry about who made it, just look at it.
Like he was saying, judge the art, not the artist, right?
Yeah, and I think he was pushing us, the viewers, to examine our own biases. Do we value a piece more because we know it was made by a famous artist? Or can we appreciate it on its own merits, regardless of who created it?
That's a great point, and it gets even more interesting when you consider the fact that a lot of Camblin's work was rediscovered years later. It's like he was burying treasure for future generations to find.
It's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
An artist trying to downplay his identity, and yet his work keeps resurfacing decades later. And it gets even more interesting. I mean, there's a whole book dedicated to his work. Bob Camblin and Complete Works. Ruminations about Life in the Late 20th Century, VL2.
The one we mentioned earlier, yeah. And it really does feel like his legacy is becoming more and more solidified between that book and the biography and that catalog raisonné, which lists every known work of his.
Right. On the one hand, we have these scholarly resources documenting his life and work, providing that context. But on the other hand, you have this constant rediscovery of these buried treasures, these pieces that were hidden away, waiting to be found and reinterpreted by new audiences.
It really is like an ongoing treasure hunt. And there's one art historian, Sandra Jensen Rollin, who even suggests that Camblin intentionally left signs, clues, and ciphers in his art, almost like there are these hidden depths that are still waiting to be unlocked.
It's like he's still playing a game with us. Challenging us to look beyond the surface, to search for the deeper meaning, to become a part of his artistic vision. And that's what makes him so compelling, I think.
It really does feel like we've been on this journey as treasure hunt, trying to piece together, like, who is Bob Camblin, this kind of enigmatic artist? But I keep coming back to that question you asked earlier about knowing the artist. Does it change how we see the art, knowing all this? His struggles, his philosophies, even that whole thing with wanting to stay anonymous?
It's a tough one, right? I mean, there's no easy answer. Some people say, yeah, for sure. Like, if you understand the artist's intentions, it can make the art richer, give it more layers. But others would say, nah, the art should stand on its own, separate from the artist's life.
Yeah, I can see both sides, actually. I mean, I think it's cool to think about what shaped an artist's vision, but then there's also something to be said for just experiencing art fresh, just letting it speak for itself.
And it seems like Camblin, he was all about that second view, wasn't he? I mean, he went to such lengths to, like, erase his own identity from the work, almost like he was saying, don't look at me, look at what I made.
Exactly. It's like he was daring us to engage with the art on its own terms,
Yeah.
to grapple with like whatever ideas or emotions it brings up, but without any preconceived notions.
Which, that brings up a much bigger question, maybe, about the role of the artist. Are they just, like, really skilled craftspeople making pretty things? Or are they more than that, like visionaries trying to challenge us to make us see the world differently?
That's a huge question. I don't know if there's one answer, but maybe, like looking at the lives and works of artists like Camblin, well, maybe that helps us figure it out, at least for ourselves.
I think that's the whole point of art, really. It sparks those questions, challenges us, makes us think critically about the world and our place in it.
It's definitely been true for me going on this deep dive into Camblin's world. He was, without a doubt, a fascinating guy. Talented painter, but also a deep thinker, a playful collaborator, and just like a true individual. He forged his own path, that's for sure.
And left behind a legacy that people are still talking about, still discovering. I mean, his work, with all those layers of meaning, all those little hidden depths, it just shows you the power of creativity.
Absolutely. And to anyone listening, I mean, we really encourage you, go check out Camblin's art for yourself. The paintings, the drawings, those Musha Volantes, experience it firsthand. Let it make you curious, maybe even challenge how you see things. And who knows, you might even uncover one of those little treasures he left behind.
And as you're doing that, keep thinking about that question, the one we talked about. Yeah. Does knowing an artist's life change how you experience their art? There's no right or wrong answer, but it's the asking that matters, the thinking about the possibilities.